Welcome back to Low Bit Rate. This week, Hank,
Maggie
listened to another 5 albums and did not discuss them with each other at all.
Before we get into things this week, we owe the members of Buck Young an apology. We fucked up and said that it was primarily a project of Jason Krumer. It is actually a collaborative project featuring Jason Krumer as well as Zoe Burke and Joseph Hammer. We would like to apologize to Zoe and Joseph for glossing over their contributions.
Andavald is an Icelandic black metal band that just put out their first full-length LP. They've mostly been unknowns up until this point and are generating some hot talk with this new record. You ready?
Yeah.
3, 2, 1. 5. Oh,
okay.
That's sad.
Yeah.
I 100% expected that, though.
Yeah. I don't even really have a lot to say about this album.
I feel like I've got a decent amount to say. I think in general, I'm not a huge, atmospheric BM fan or black gaze fan at all. But I think this album approaches the genre with a lot of energy and dynamicism that I really appreciate, especially in the vocals. Like the vocal performance on this, at the end of the third track in particular, is super impressive, and it really stays far away from a lot of the pitfalls of other atmospheric shit, which I think is trying way too hard to subvert genre expectations and creating your own genre expectations. This one sounds really alive and heavy. It's a lot of the riffs feel like bees' nests about to explode, and it makes the album carry a lot of weight to me. And I think a lot of the riffs are unbelievably catchy and sinister sounding for this genre too, which tends more to go for more of a triumphant textural kind of sound.
I struggle to even find things to say about this album because I am extremely picky when it comes to atmospheric black metal.
Yeah,
as I was listening to this, I struggled to find any definitive, moments or elements that really stood out to me.
Not even the title track. I thought the title track was so good.
There wasn't. I mean, obviously you're 100% correct that the vocals here are a cut above most, not even just atmospheric black metal, but most black metal. Really engaging, really, dynamic vocal performances. The problem with everything else is that, for the, it's about a 40-minute runtime, and I just found myself awash in these just droning, kind of samey sounding, at least to me, riffs, and the production just wasn't really there for me as far as helping any one particular element really stick out. I really just kind of struggled to find a whole lot to be engaged with here. And I think that's just kind of generally my problem with atmospheric black metal as a genre.
Same.
It relies so much on creating engaging textures as opposed to having really amazing riffs and things like that like more traditional black metal would. And so you really have to do something that's really gonna, grab my attention, whether it's having, unique production choices or, finding ways to create memorable riffs within that genre framework. And there was never really a particular moment here that really stood out for me. And I knew you were gonna like this album. Honestly, I debated giving it a 4.
Damn, seriously?
I know, yeah.
That's crazy. I thought there was so much definition in the riffs on these. The fourth track, the main lead guitar is constantly evolving and changing, I thought.
As far as, atmospheric black metal goes, you're kind of beholden to sort of the standard of the genre, which, problematic nature aside, is probably Burzum's Philosopheme. And I just sort of, every time I listen to an album like this, I go, okay, what's it doing to progress beyond, the classic slew of Atma Black albums. And every time I kept listening to this, all that was sticking out to me was the vocals, which are excellent. The vocals are really quite good. I would love
the third track.
Yeah.
We're just going
yeah,
the whole time.
Totally. No, that was excellent. And it was the one thing that was really keeping me actively engaged in listening, because so often what I find when I listen to atmospheric black metal is that I'm listening and I'm just all right, and then I tune out, and then 50 minutes later the album is over. This was able to keep my attention solely based on the efficacy of the vocal performance. But everything else, it was a snooze fest for me.
You know what? Leave it at that.
Leave it at that. Different strokes
For different
folks. Clay Rendering are a now 4-piece dark wave band, currently based in California, originally from the Midwest, currently signed to Dominic Farnow's Hospital Productions, a favorite label of mine. This is their second album, I believe, and their first with a full band. 3, 2, 1. Yeah.
I just am not about Mike Connolly's vocals at all.
150%. We were just talking about how vocals can really make or break an album, and these vocals are not good.
No.
They really got on my nerves. And I really, I went into this thinking, God, I would really love a nice like dark wave or like goth album for this summer, because what's better than a summertime, goth album or post-punk or whatever. And every single track I was listening to this and I was like, man, I really hate these vocals. And it's a shame because I really like Tara Connolly's vocals throughout this thing. I think she's far and away the superior vocalist, and anytime she pops up, I'm always really pleasantly, surprised. I think her voice also melds well with Mike's in a way that's satisfying.
The song Black Vows, that song's the best one on the album. It's exclusively her vocal.
The best thing about Black Vows, too, is that it strikes a really nice balance where the vocals aren't overpowering in the mix, which I think is the other primary problem with Mike's vocals. Is that not only are they ineffectual and kind of, cloying, but in addition to that, they're really high in the mix. So it's like all you're hearing. Don't Understand You, which I believe was one of the lead singles from this,
oh my God,
really suffers from this exact problem. All you hear is, I don't understand you!
That and Cities of the World are like a 1-2 punch of driving me insane.
Yeah.
Cities of the World has that "We continue
Yeah.
to pew out buildings at night," which is like just blaring in the mix.
Absolutely.
Completely dominates any kind of little instrumental thing they're setting up.
And it sucks because, I, pretty uniformly have loved most of the things that Farnow puts out on Hospital Productions. I tend to really trust his taste in things. I first came across this band because he had included them in one of his Bergen mixes, and I was like, okay, yeah, this could be it. And then I listened to the lead single as we were preparing to review this, which was "Don't Understand You," and I was like, ugh, I hope the rest of the album isn't like that.
Yeah.
And it was. And for an album that's a little over 40 minutes long, this felt like a drag. Yeah, it was a drag.
Yeah.
All of that said, I did give it a 5. There are a lot of things to really like about this. I think instrumentally and, aside from the vocal issues, production-wise, this thing sounds really nice. It's a perfectly serviceable dark wave record. It's got, it hits all the elements that I like my dark wave to hit. It's melodramatic. It's got some nice synths. Everything kind of melds together in this really nice textural mush that I appreciate a lot.
I think the synth tones are pretty good too.
Yeah,
it's very like 80s, but done in a very tasteful way, I think, which is cool.
Yeah, definitely. And it captures that Cali goth vibe nicely. Which is interesting. Given that they're not even of California. I wish I had more nice things to say about this because I was really going in gunning for it.
I was amped about it too, but
what can you do?
Really those vocals.
That's just the way it goes. Sorry everybody. Sorry, Mike. I'm sure you're a nice guy.
Yeah. Consumer Electronics is the legendary noise outlet started by Philip Best when he was just a teenager. They've been making music for decades now and have gone through multiple lineups. The current iteration on this album consisting of Philip, his wife Sarah, and Russell Haswell. 3, 2, 1.
This is about what I expected from you.
Hot. This is a hot 7.
This is a hot 7. This is one of my most biased opinions, likely, because I've been a huge Consumer Electronics, White House, pretty much all things Phil Best fan for quite some time now. The previous two consumer electronics albums, Dollhouse Songs and Estuary English, are some of my favorites as far as power electronics and, shouty British man screaming over warbly noise goes. And on this particular album, I really appreciated the kind of steps forward that they had taken from their previous records. What I really appreciated about this in particular is that they really kind of let Russell Haswell shine in a way that he hasn't as much on previous records. From what I understand, most of what he does is through modular synths, which is where you get all of those really stabby kick drums and things like that. But there's some more kind of atmospheric elements on here that really kind of showcase his production tendencies in a way that I really like. It also, traditionally, consumer electronics albums have kind of been notorious for having not only the blistering electronics, but mostly shouted vocals. And seeing Best kind of do some more subdued performances and let his wife Sarah take over was really interesting for me.
Yeah, I'm coming to this album from a much less nuanced perspective because somehow I've pretty much missed the entire project as long as I've been listening to this genre. For me, there's a lack of interplay between the instrumental parts and the vocals that really needs to be there for me to enjoy this kind of music, I think.
Interesting.
There's a couple tracks, like the first track where halfway through they kind of start to blend the vocals and modulate them into the more squealy shit that I think is really interesting, and the entirety of the 12-minute Murder of JJ track is constantly evolving and constantly doing some call and response, really interesting shit in it between the vocals. But outside of those two tracks, it feels like almost all of the instrumental noise parts could basically be interchanged with any other vocal part, and it really wouldn't make that big of a difference.
Interesting. Well, and so you recently kind of started delving into the White House catalog, right?
Yeah.
And so I guess I'm interested in specifically how this shakes up to an album like Birdseed, which you had recently listened to, because I mean the same essential elements are there, where you have really kind of rudimentary electronics plus shouty vocals over the top. And so I guess what was different about that for you?
I think with White House, there's way more tonal versatility in the instrumental parts. No one backing noise track feels very similar to any other in the album, and I think on this one it's all basically just kind of squealy, minimal techno, with the exception of the first track in the Murder of JJ.
Interesting. Okay. See, and I guess what was so exciting for me was listening to the entirety of the 8-minute second track, Carnage Mechanics. I really loved hearing on previous consumer electronics albums. Best has kind of reined his voice in a little bit and kind of talked in those more hushed tones and delivered his his monologues about whatever. But to hear him do it for most of an 8-minute runtime was really exciting for me. And I liked how much of, as opposed to building towards something screamier and squelchier, he kind of builds into something a little bit more emotionally manic, which kind of added, an additional element of performance to this thing that I really enjoyed. I would agree to some extent that I think some of the instrumentation kind of tends to bleed a little bit. And occasionally there are moments where I feel like Sarah Best's vocal performances can edge into a little bit too earnest. But by and large, I mean, I really didn't find as much to... I went into this being really skeptical, and because of how, some of the problems that I have with the previous Ramla album that we reviewed a couple of weeks ago. But I didn't find really a whole lot to be disappointed with as far as this goes. I wouldn't say it's a dramatic improvement over, something like Dollhouse Songs, which is one of my favorite power electronics albums. But it's certainly more than serviceable. I think it's a really excellent slight left turn from where they've treaded in the past. EABS, hope that's how you say it, are a Polish jazz group. This is their second full-length album, Slavic Spirits, and it features Tenderlonius from the UK on flute, saxophone, and electronics duties.
3, 2, 1! That's exactly
that's what I thought. Yeah,
100%.
yeah. It's a jazz album, and I struggle so much with a lot of contemporary jazz in particular, as far as, it's just a genre I'm not an expert in, flat out. And I tend to struggle a lot with finding, really distinctive elements to point out, whether it's, compositionally or whatever else, that I can point to that differentiate it from jazz albums that came out fucking 50 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously, that's a bit more of you will have a more nuanced perspective on that, but this is just not my forte, so I'd like to preface by saying that at least.
Yeah, I was pretty impressed by this. I thought as far as contemporary jazz goes, they stuck to their guns pretty well and mostly played within their range of things that they're good at. I thought that having most of these tracks depend on just like jamming on a hard backbeat and whipping out like technical, sharp solos is totally the way to go, because I think any of the tracks, specifically like the first 2 or 3 and the last 2 or 3, that are mostly just kind of like jamming on some melodies, come off really well and really interesting, especially because EABS's whole shtick is having like hip-hop influenced jazz music. And when I went into this, I was a little afraid of it sounding like
fucking beats to chill
and
stuff
beats
too.
to chillax too, but with live instrumentation. And I think for the most part it dodges that pretty well. Most of the hip-hop sensibilities come through rhythmically more than anything else, which I think is exactly the way to go for it. I will say that these guys should not try to go for the more moody, avant kind of atmospheric shtick that they go to in the middle of the album, because I don't think that's really where their core competencies lie. I think that they just come off a little too pristine and sterile and well produced and sharp to pull off that really emotive style of jazz. And I think sticking mostly to just blowing on that trumpet and that sax real heavy and real fast and real sharp is the way to go. And I think when they do that, a lot of these songs have strong melodies that are fun to bang your head to and are good for walking around.
I guess I would essentially agree with all that, but my deduction of 2 points from your score really just kind of comes from the fact that, I just kind of didn't really care a lot of the time.
Even the last track with that strong, like, da-da-da-da-da-da-da.
And I made notes about a couple of these, I'm going to butcher the pronunciation of this, but the 5th track, Cieza, maybe, had a really nice head to it. There were some, nice kind of jazzy, moments. It is a jazz album, obviously. There's going to be fucking jazzy moments, Jesus Christ. That track had a nice head. It had a nice, flow. It moved like a jazz album. I enjoyed it for what it was. But all that said, I'm just kind of at this point in my life, like, a lot less interested in technical, flashy solos. And I think that's sort of what turns me off about a lot of contemporary jazz, is that I tend to like, my jazz freer and more experimental. And while this had some, skronkier kind of moments on it, there just wasn't really a whole lot for me to latch onto as far as, something that aligns with kind of my own personal tastes and what I value in music. I can step back and say this is an objectively well-performed and well-produced album, and I certainly commend the fact that these are group compositions and that they're not playing standards. But one of the things that really kind of stood out to me was, and I don't know necessarily how fair this is, but I was, as I was listening to the album, kind of looking at their mission statement and kind of the press kit for this album, essentially. And they talk kind of a lot of big game about shirking kind of the Western musical tradition as far as it comes to when it comes to jazz and all those things. And I don't think they do that.
I don't think they do that.
You need to be able to back that up, and they kind of don't on this. It's a serviceable jazz album. They play well together. They're obviously competent and talented musicians, but compositionally there just isn't really a whole lot of anything for me here.
Yeah, that's fair. For my money, I was just looking for some well-performed jazz that has a lot of hooks, and that's about what I got from this.
Burial. You may or may not know him. He is the enigmatic UK grime, dubstep, whatever you'd like to call it, producer whose, notorious album Untrue changed the way we listen to. Just completely rattled the electronic music world and kind of forever changed the way that we listen to UK-based music. He has, post Untrue, went through a long period of hiatus. His identity was not known for some time. And since then, he has not dropped a full length, but has dropped a lot of collaborations with folks like Fortet and Tom York. This is his most recent single that was debuted on Marianne Hobbs' BBC Six Radio a couple of weeks ago. And it is a single with a B-side. So let's jump right into it. 3, 2, 1. Wow.
I thought it'd be a little higher.
I thought you were going to be a lot lower.
Really?
Interesting. Yeah. You didn't like Untrue, did you?
I didn't dislike Untrue. I just didn't rock my world as hard as it rocked the music world.
The first time that I heard Untrue, it totally fucked me up. I love that album. As far as, just everything that he achieved with such a minimal toolkit. That album was primarily composed in a program that's essentially similar to Audacity.
Mm-hmm.
It was so unique and expressive and alive, and had that, all the elements of the reverberations of that album can still be felt today. When it comes to Claustro and State Forest, I was a little disappointed. The first time that I heard Claustro, I remember not really loving it. I remember kind of feeling as if it was sort of feeling as if it was a little too similar to his previous work. Upon re-listening to it a couple of times, what he really succeeds at doing, and what he's always succeeded at doing, is chopping up his samples that are usually from, he's really influenced by the kind of R&B of the early 2000s, chopping up those vocal samples into new and kind of alien ways and making them, his own. And I think he does succeed with that on Claustro in particular, and that track has really sort of come to grow on me a lot.
Me too, totally. Here's my ice-cold take on this single.
Hit me.
I don't think he put this out to top anybody's album of the year lists or really blow anybody with an understanding of electronic music out of the water. I think this was put out to be a little teaser for his fans, to keep them excited about the project, to let them know what he's up to, that sort of thing. And I think in that sense, this totally succeeds. I don't think anyone's going to give this a 9 or a 10, but I don't think it was really meant to either.
Yeah.
And I think you can even tell that just from the fact that the B-side is just an 8-minute long, pretty run-of-the-mill ambient track.
And that is really what knocked the score down pretty significantly for me.
Yeah, me too.
I listened to State Forest, and 8 minutes later I was just like, okay, and ambient music for me, I'm really particular about what I like and what succeeds for me, and this just didn't. His ambient work on Untrue and in previous singles that he's put out, I've liked a lot more. State Forest was just a little bland for me.
Totally.
It takes about 3 minutes for any semblance of a synth lead to come through, and by that point I was pretty much checked out. That said, the way that Claustro moves, that little fake-out ending right at the end, before it kind of switches into something even more off-kilter, is really excellent. It has all the hallmarks of a classic Burial track. It's got that kind of vinyl distortion.
I think it's very tastefully hokey too.
Definitely.
If that makes any sense. A lot of the synth tones are just like some shit you could do on an iPhone app, basically.
Totally.
But it's pulled off super endearingly, I thought.
I think Burial's primary success as an artist has always been taking these corny conventions and spinning them into something that's really kind of emotionally impactful. He did the same thing, with the classic track Archangel with that fucking Ray J sample. Takes a song that's on its surface really not all that great, cuts out a couple of key lines and turns into something that is pretty emotionally devastating. I think he achieves a similar effect on Claustro. It's a shame that the B-side doesn't have more going on. Okay. Now it's time for a couple of quick fire recommendations. Shit that we've been enjoying in the last week or so since the previous episode. This week, I have been listening to over and over again because it's summertime and I need some chill house to cool me off. Kieran Hebden's most recent single from earlier this year, Only Human. I'm sure you heard of it because everybody was freaking the fuck out about it. It's got a really excellent Nelly Furtado vocal sample throughout the entire thing. Everything that we were talking about Burial as far as repurposing pop for your own ends was true of this. One of my favorite house tracks of the year, maybe my favorite track of the year. Second, I have been listening to Brain Bomb's Singles Collection 2, which is a compilation of some of their more recent, compilation EP single material. It also has a couple of great, excellent performances of some Brain Bomb's classics, including a truly inspired performance of Danny Was a Street Whore, one of my favorite Brain Bomb's tracks. And finally, I accidentally got into anime the other week, so if you are at all interested in that, you should check out the first two Devilman OVAs.
I knew that was going to be one of your recs.
Fucking...
I knew it.
I've watched both of them like 3 times in the past couple of weeks because they're so fucking good. The animation quality is stellar. If you like gory, disgusting, maybe it's a little sexual, unfortunately, but what isn't? Anime...
This show is not... This show is entirely asexual.
Absolutely. We abhor sex on this show. But in the Devilman OVAs, there's some titties, there's some blood, there's a bunch of stuff you're probably going to like. Definitely recommend checking it out. It has some great music, too. So it's kind of a nice, inspired kind of anime funk soundtrack to the whole thing. So give it a watch.
Let me hit you with some cool shit I've been up to this week. This week, I've been playing a lot of Zoo Tycoon 2. It's a super fun game. You all know about Tycoon games. It's just like Roller Coaster Tycoon or SimCity or whatever. You just make a zoo. It's super fun. It's super relaxing. I'm just pissed off because my fucking beluga whale won't quit beaching itself for some reason. Like, come on, Jason. It's not that hard. Also, Dorothy Ashby put out an album in 1968 called Afro Harping that is super good. The only other jazz harpist that I know is Alice Coltrane, so I'm pretty unfamiliar with that kind of jazz instrumentation, and it comes off super fresh and super exciting to me, and if you haven't heard that kind of shit before, it'll probably come off the same way to you. And my last rec is that next time you're cooking some kind of meat that involves a red sauce, maybe a lasagna, maybe a bolognese, something like that, you should sprinkle just a bit of brown sugar in there. It cuts the acidity of the tomatoes really well, and it comes out.
And it is grilling season.
It is. So get out there, throwing that red sauce on your...
Right, straight on the grill. Thanks so much for watching. We'll see you, I don't want to say next week because shit keeps coming up. But
we'll see me next week.
You might see Henry. You might see me too. I don't know. We'll see you when we see you. Thanks so much for watching.